Hi. Okay. Let's talk about books. These are the books I read in August, and some of them were so mid to average that I'm going to talk about them first. We're going to speed through them. Even though I really do love roasting a book that I didn't like, sometimes I talk about them for so long. That's not what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to do those first. That's the plan. I will say we had some really good ones this month, even though we had more DNFs, did not finish, and more mid books than usual. Like it was kind of rough for that reason. There were some good ones. Just so you're oriented, these 4 were pretty fantastic. These 5 were middle tier. These in the front are the ones we're going to go through first. Let's start with The Third Coast. I chose this for my summer reading challenge. Set in the Midwest was the genre category. I got this copy from the shop. It is about Chicago. I love nonfiction. I love the history of cities. We've got Boomtown right here, one of my favorite books of all time. I felt like this would be a shoo-in. It was not. First of all, it covers Chicago. Look how long this is. From 1940 to 1960. Like, so zoomed in and specific. Second of all, it was so much research. But, like, I would read 20 pages and be like, what did I just read? Like, none of that stuck with me. I don't even think any of that was interesting. And it was so over and over just the opposite of compelling that eventually I don't even think I really skimmed. Yeah, 164 pages in, I quit. For me to quit a book about Chicago, it has got to be a mess. So I don't recommend The Third Coast. That was fast. That was really fast for me. That was fast roast of a book. Let's keep it up. Book number 2 was, I forgot a book in my July video. I'll tell you about it really quick because this is not a graded activity. According to this, I read Ordinary Time by Annie B. Jones in July. I didn't because I quit after 2 essays. It would have been fun. I already got rid of the book, but it would have been fun if I didn't because it would have paired really well, contrastingly, with These Precious Days by Ann Patchett. Ordinary Time was the opposite of an essay being a creative force to explore an interesting idea. It was like a boring story. End. One of them was literally like, I went to the YMCA to take a dance class, even though I can't dance, and I made friends. I was like, I don't care. Oh, and I was stuck in the airport when I was reading it, which surely did not help. And she has an intro that is like, this book is for people who stay. Like, people who stay where they grew up. Like, why would you do that in the intro of a book? You're just like telling half of the people reading it that it's not for them. Anyway, so I did not like that book, but I might like her podcast. The author runs a small bookstore in Thomasville, Georgia. And so I really think it was like, if you already liked her, you would probably like to hear her stories about taking line dancing at the YMCA. But I didn't. The next book was Last Summer on State Street. So this is Last Summer on State Street. I picked it up at Call and Response, but I've had my eye on it for a while. It's just one of those classic Chicago books that you see around. It's fiction, and I DNF'd it maybe, let's see, 48 pages in. I skimmed the end and no regrets. So preachy. So it's a pretty short book, as you can tell. And it was really explainy. When you read fiction, when you write fiction, they always say, show, don't tell. And this was tell, not show. And sometimes she would tell you something like twice on one page, which is the ultimate crime against the reader because they picked up your book. They entered into the sacred contract of, I will give you my time for these words you put on this page. And for you to say something twice on one page is so insulting to the fact that they have been reading every sentence on the page. Like they saw the first time you said she was mad. Why are you saying she's mad again? If it's not building to something, and in this book, it was not. I was so bummed because it's a book about young girls. I love things that explore girlhood. This is not one that really did it for me. It reminded me of a book that I started reading at the shop that honestly, I think I'm going to move up my TBR because I DNF'd this one. And the book is called High Rise Stories. And it is set in the Robert Taylor homes, Cabrini Green, other public housing projects in Chicago, but it is a nonfiction book. So it's like an oral history, basically, of people who lived in these homes, talking about the community they found, the safety, the danger, the maintenance, how nice it was when you moved in, how when the funding was cut, there was no money to take care of anything. And then they called it a failure, which I also was just reading about in Eviction by Matthew Desmond. But I did not read about it, so I DNF'd it, and I had no regrets. And it was also one of those books where they're too obvious. The author is too obvious about like the themes, where it's just not artful enough to be worth reading to me. That was a little slower. I'm gonna pick it up for This Here Flesh by Cole Arthur Riley, another one I got at Call and Response around Juneteenth. This is a nonfiction religious essay collection. I don't know if I'd call it an essay collection. It's just chapters, books, exploring spirituality and stuff. And I did not vibe with it at all. Let me read you this sentence. This is the open of a chapter. So if you're like, that doesn't make sense to me because I have not read the book, no. Like this is the beginning of the chapter. There is no context that I have that you do not. One day, at the end of all things, the legs of all the tables in the world will come alive. And this is nonfiction. And without apology, they'll each begin plodding towards the space where the top and bottom of the earth meet, and will be terrified, of course. Essentially, this turns into a really poetic and overwrought way to say she imagines a bunch of tables lining the earth's perimeter, and then everyone is invited to feast because that is what happens like when Jesus comes back or something. And I can't get through you telling me the tables are walking to get there. And I felt so frustrated by the lyricism. I feel rude putting that in quotation marks, but the poetic-ness and the lyricism of her writing just did not work for me. Like I did not like reading it. I did not like having to translate it into something sensible. And I didn't think that the essays were constructed well. Like one thing didn't really lead to another in a way that like was moving or instructive. I don't know. So I DNF'd it around page 140. I said I imagined that I would love a conversation with the author, but reading her words was miserable. And there were a couple things that I noted and learned that I will be keeping this book for, which is, you know, props for that. The one thing that I do want to share that was so interesting was I think it's this one. Yeah, she was meeting with a woman who was a nun, and they have a prayer labyrinth. So I just learned from You're Wrong About that the difference between a labyrinth and a maze is that a labyrinth only has one pathway to get to the place you're getting to. It's just really circuitous, whereas a maze has a lot of offshoots that lead to dead ends. Apparently, those two are different things. So I had that little piece of knowledge, and then she's talking about a prayer labyrinth, and it's a physical structure where you walk in and you pray sort of through your confusion to the middle and then work your way back out. So you are symbolizing with your body what you hope to achieve through communing with the Lord in prayer, which is like working through something that's difficult and recognizing with your literal feet like how windy and difficult things can be, and how also like you are able to come back out on the other side of that, which is so cool. I loved that. But I did not like the book, and I am sad to think what other things I might have missed because of just the writing style. Okay, that's also the last we need this guy for. I am now going to do some of the hit or miss. Each of these books was hit and miss pieces. I had pieces that were hit and miss. This book is called Dances. It's by Nicole Cuffey. I found it at Call and Response. I had never heard of it. I was obsessed with the cover. Why would I not be? I was a dancer. Of course I'm going to love this. I imagine it's really hard to write ballet. The main character in this is a ballerina. She's the first Black woman to be a principal at the New York City Ballet or something impressive-y in dance world-y. The problem was the stakes of the story were not set up or defined at all. So for dozens and dozens of pages, I'm just reading this about this dancer going to rehearsal, coming home, like my boyfriend's like kind of meh. My friends, I have to go to PT. Like I need to have this conversation. Man, I miss my brother. But like you're just kind of floating through. It's like you wanted to go to the beach and you woke up in like a wave pool. Like so what I'm going to spoil this. What it turns out to be the case, because she's telling you all these amazing stories about her brother, rewinding through the past. Like my brother paid for my ballet classes. My brother would walk me to ballet, so I was safe. Like all of these great things. But also in the present day, she's like, I can't think about Paul unless I'm in class and I can work through it while I'm doing my grand pas mas. And you're like, why? Like he was such a great brother. That is the screw that did not get tightened all the way, because the fact is Paul left 5 years ago, and this is like the central tragedy or difficulty of her existence. And because the author doesn't tell you that for like so many pages, you're just adrift. And she has this boyfriend who's like not bad but not great, and that is another thing where it's like I need to like know how this relationship is like transforming my main character. Like, why am I here? And so anyway, I almost DNF'd this. I sat down to write my review about how it was so bad. I decided to read one more page. It's like her and the best friend in their tutus backstage, and they get in a fight and they start physically fighting. And I was like laughing. I was like, what is happening? But they also very quickly during, like it's like one page, and they're like, what are we doing? And they like slow down and they kind of look at each other and laugh, and the main character tells the reveal to the best friend, which is that she's pregnant. I already told you I'm spoiling this. So, and like that moment worked like as this scene, as this piece of fiction, as this like establishing what we're doing in these relationships, and like they felt real. And so that pulled me in enough to finish the book, but it wasn't super well written. So stuff to work on there. Oh, let's do Citizen next, because this is a really great book that just either went over my head or around my head, or is not something that I have I think to read poetry, you have to have a decent amount of patience. And I did give this like my best patience. Like when I am going to read a book of poetry, I really will focus in. I really will give it my best. Like I don't want to speed read poetry. I think you can do that, but that's like kind of not the idea. Some of this really hit for me, but a lot of it was just not, I don't want to say clear enough, because like the point of poetry is that you have to think really hard about things, but it was not my thing for most of it. It is published by Graywolf, which we love Graywolf. They did In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. They did a lot of Percival Everett's earlier stuff, and If you like poetry, you might love Citizen. Also, please let me announce to you, this is a hoodie that's ripped. I always thought it was a boot from above full of paint. So that's a fun fact. It's not really that fun. Okay, I finally read Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jessie Sutano. So this is a cozy mystery about an old woman named Vera who runs a tea house in Chinatown, San Francisco, and a dead body shows up there one morning before her early 5 a.m. walk through the neighborhood. And she's convinced it's a murder, even though there's no evidence of that. So she decides to solve it herself. And it is full of good characters. I don't really like mysteries, and this was that, and that was not my favorite thing. But this is a really beloved book. It's a really fun time. It's a sweet story, and there's also this moment where Vera becomes close with the wife of the man who died and their maybe 4-year-old kid. And I loved those scenes where she was in their home taking care of the kid. She helps the mom start a photography business. And I just really love anytime someone is raising a kid surrounded by multi-generational family, or in this case not family. And it was so crucial for the mom in the story, and like for Vera, she was so much less lonely through that experience. And anyway, I really loved that factor of the book, but I didn't this wasn't the mystery that is going to make me fall in love with mysteries. It was a good time though. Okay, I read The Wedding People by Alison Espach. What to say? This book is so popular, and I thought it was a really solid 3-star book. The thing that held it back for me was the author kind of getting in the way and making you hear her voice in how she turned everything into a lesson for the main character, and then kind of spelled out for you how it was a lesson for the main character. That drove me crazy because I was like, I am reading the book. I know what's happening. And also, it's okay if I have to think a little bit to get the themes to come through. And that's what we talked about earlier. Like, I think in my last video about the difference between like Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay versus something a little bit less excellent, actually, is sort of the ability to trust the reader and trust your own skills as a writer, that the themes that you're developing are actually going to come through. So the setup of this book is a woman, her marriage is ending. She's really depressed, and so she leaves her job as a professor to fly to, like, in the middle of class one day or the day before class, to fly to this vacation spot that she had wanted to go to with her husband back when they were thinking about staying married. And she decides that she's going to kill herself while she's there. When she arrives, it is a hotel that has been completely rented out for a wedding, except for her. She somehow snuck in a reservation. So she meets the bride in the elevator, and the bride is like, "Why are you here?" And she's like, "I'm going to kill myself." And the bride's like, "So that will not be great for my wedding weekend." And the lady's like, "You'll be fine." And so that begins the friendship at the center of this book, which is between the main character who you follow the whole time, who is not one of the wedding people, and then Lila, who is the bride. And you end up meeting so many other people involved with the wedding. There is a suicide attempt in the beginning, and then she aborts it part of the way through. And within a fifth of the book, that part is finished, and the rest of it is her staying on for this week. It's her reforming bonds with the people around her and examining what makes life worth living, but also like what made her who she is. And it uses the bride Lila, who's in her mid or late 20s, as a sort of cipher for, what is the main character's name? Phoebe. No wonder I couldn't remember that. For Phoebe to look at her own life and the decisions that she made and the marriage that she is now leaving. And it was a good read. I had a good time while I was reading it. Whenever the author would get over explaining, I would roll my eyes, but then I would flip the page and I would be in the next little moment. There's a day where they go on a boat. There's a day where they go surfing. She ends up at like the bachelorette weekend situation. And it also got a little obvious in one of the main things this uses that actually does make sense is the idea that you can tell people things if you don't know them in a way that you can't if there are other pressures on your relationship with them. So the wedding people open up to Phoebe in ways that they don't open up to each other, and she's able to see them in ways that they aren't seen by their family members, their brother, their partner, their parent, whatever. And that is a really interesting conceit, and it made sense for what the book was. But by the sixth deep bonding conversation with Phoebe setup moment, like I was like, I see what we're doing here. Like your fingerprints are too smudged on this thing that you're using, which is like now she is having to write a speech and she's like working with the best man and he's downloading everything to her, and it's like this sixth character who's spilled all of their secrets to her. And it kind of felt like looking at the scaffolding behind the plot. Like, okay, now she's going to talk to deep chat with this guy and then this girl and then the mom and then the daughter and then that guy. And that's the book. And I want a little more finesse there. So it's a little better than I'm giving it credit for. I think I'm airing out the things that frustrated me because I feel like the hype around this book follows it enough that like if you're gonna like this, you're gonna read it and you will end up liking it. I will compliment the writing. For me, at the sentence and the paragraph level, it was super readable, which is, I can forgive a lot if like the sentences are coherent. And I liked the main character being an older woman. The book, right, the reviewer, I guess, Emma on Goodreads, or Emma Reads Too Much on Substack, said like the twists and the like plot devices were like a little bit obvious by the time they happened, but like it was fine. And I kind of agree. Like I'm not coming to this book because I want something that's going to like redefine literature in the modern world and the way that we can use words on a page to invent something new. Like I come to this for what this cover is telling me, which is like something a little bit desperate and a little bit beautiful. And that's absolutely what you'll get from this. So okay, I did say the characters were the best part, and they really were so full of personality and so funny, and I enjoyed that part a lot. Okay, the next book in the mid tier is The Killing Fields of East New York, or I should call it the solid tier. This is by Stacey Horn. This is published by Gillian Flynn's imprint. So the author of Gone Girl has a book imprint where she publishes books, and this is the first nonfiction title that she did. I don't remember how I found it, but it is the story of the first subprime mortgage scandal. So obviously you remember like 2008 when the whole economy crashed, etc., because of subprime mortgages. This book is set in the 70s, which is horrifying that is something that has been happening and been looked into and was still able to happen for 30, 40 years going on from there. I thought one thing that this book did that was so interesting was explain violent crime as the result of white collar crime. So whenever there's a murder, she'll talk about the abandoned house that it took place in, and she has explained to you previously why the home is abandoned and why it makes sense for a mortgage company to come in and buy something, devalue it, sell it, empty it out, and let it sit there, and why that is a way, something that leads to murder. And she's completely willing to put this on the white collar criminals at the top of this scandal. And I think that's so interesting. And I think it's maybe not a way to explain the whole world as like a complete way of outside of a book, like of looking at everything. Inside of the book, it absolutely works, because basically the argument she's making is that the nightmare that East New York, which is the neighborhood name, turned into, it's in Southeast Brooklyn, was due to people maliciously ruining it because they did not see any value in the people there, and they saw more value in the money they could make by ruining neighborhoods completely intentionally. And I thought that came through so clearly. I also thought it was so unique for her to explain white collar crime as something so disgusting and so problematic and so immoral, and to go so hard after that. And she points out how if you commit white collar crime, there is no body, in the way that if you commit murder, most of the time there is, and how that makes it so hard to not just prosecute or investigate white collar crime, but to know that there's something to be looking at in the first place. I really appreciated just that argument, and I thought it was so unusual, and I thought her research was so done so well, and she talks so lovingly about the neighborhoods, and she's not from there. She just did her homework, and she talked to the people who were around, and she really makes you care about these rundown neighborhoods in Brooklyn, New York. She talks about the community gardens. East New York had and still has, I think, more community gardens per resident than any other neighborhood in New York City. And she builds a really beautiful, I don't know if beautiful is the word, but like a damning structure that shows what all of the malice and self and greed of people who work for mortgage companies who just came after immigrants, people who speak English as a second language, families who are not taken care of, and how everything was just destroyed, and how something that was meant to be helpful and beautiful and to let people acquire homes was perverted by people who understood that the loophole was something no one would know or care to close. So I'm kind of blabbering, but the thing that was cool, and I wanted to learn about this, and I did. The thing that did not work for me here was she also did counterpoint, so where you switch between each chapter with the timeline that you're talking about, and it didn't work at all, because when she starts, you're going between the FHA scandal, Federal Housing Authority scandal, and the neighborhood, I think, and it's like 1971 or something, and you're going back and forth. But then one of the timelines speeds way up, and so you find yourself in like the 80s when you're seeing the breakdown of the neighborhood, but you're still in like 1973 when you're with the FBI chapters and like reading about what's happening in the neighborhood. So it's really confusing, because things will break down in one chapter and then you're reading about like that street and it hasn't been destroyed yet in the next chapter. And that's not a straightforward way to present information. And it was not necessary. I think she was trying to do something cool with going back and forth, and it didn't work. It reminded me more of Just Mercy than Killers of the Flower Moon. So Just Mercy was written in counterpoint, and I thought that that was one of the weaker parts of the book because the every story is the same man who is unjustly incarcerated. The other of every other is so many other stories of men who are unjustly incarcerated that it's really hard to keep them all separate. And this book, on the other hand, takes a bunch of research and legal things and government scandals and arranges it in a way that just like tugs you along so interestingly through the murders and then through the FBI investigation and then through David Grann's own information that he finds. And this one leads you through as the reader with like a lot of trust in your ability, but also the structure is a gift to you as you read it. And Stacy could have used, I think, a stronger editing hand, or maybe just a beta reader who was like, girl, I am so confused. Because I was just like, if you read this book, actually, you should read it chronologically. And if you want, I will make you a list of how to do that by a page, because I would love to hear how that would go, because I think it would be so cool. I think I would remember things better, and I think it would just make more sense. So, Sarah J. Maas, someone made a thing of how to read her stuff in order. I will do it for Stacey Horn, Killing Fields of East New York. I got hot again. The next book is Jeanette Haynes' The All of It. Not sure I said her name right. This is a really brief work of fiction. I'm just going to read my review because that will be more brief, like a better use of time. Succinct. That's kind of the word I was looking for. Complexity. A brother and sister live as husband and wife. The priest finds out on the man's deathbed, and the woman tells him the story. She's not apologizing, just sharing. And the priest is torn whether to be a friend and just listen or a priest. How do we metabolize complexity when we have firm beliefs about right and wrong? A small, strong little book, and set in Ireland, so sort of similar to Small Things Like These. That says it pretty well. I guess I would say there's a fly fishing component. So when the priest is having to go out and think about the story that he's heard from this woman he's known for years, he is fishing and it's bad weather for fishing, and he's stuck with this kind of annoying teenager, and that provides some like tinsel strength through the novel of cables of like action for his contemplation as someone who's trying to figure out what to do with this story from someone that he's known and loved and respected for many years. And I really love stories that force someone with a really simple, straightforward way of looking at the world to realize that things are more complicated than that and figure out what they're going to do with it. And I really did like that the female character in this, whose brother has just died, but the townspeople think that they're married, is, and they don't know their brother's sister. I liked that the woman, and I said this in my review, but I kind of got it from Ann Patchett's intro. She really isn't apologizing. She is kind of the static character in the story, and the priest is the one who's being forced to figure out what to do with what happened. And I really liked that because I also like when there's respect for the way that you have to do things to make your life come out safe, and the things that you have to do to survive, both physically, like their physical survival was threatened as teenagers by their father. Also, socially, like the reason that they let people believe they were husband and wife is because then they didn't have to marry, and she was able to be more free, and it would be better if she could have just gotten to be honest about wanting to live alone, and honest that her brother was her brother, and that was not something that socially was going to work for the small town that they ended up living in. And so I really like the dignity that it gives the female main character about the choices that she and her brother had to make as people coming out of violence and coming out of poverty. And I think that's so important. Also, just in life, I think part of empathy is understanding what decisions people are forced to make when they don't have very many options. And this book did that, interestingly and well. And it was brief. And you should read it. Then I read Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. I think this is a musical. And I think the musical is called Fun Home. And I haven't seen it, so that's not interesting. But this is a graphic novel that was on the New York Times Best 100 list. Hang on. I am a late arrival to the graphic novel universe. Teddy and I were talking about them, and I was telling her the ones I had read were mostly ones Megan has put in my hands, and she reads a lot of middle grade graphic novels. And that got me into the genre. There's really sweet stories of friends, and a lot of ones set in schools, which is great for middle schoolers. I haven't owned one, I don't think, until this one, and I bought Persepolis, which I read recently. And I really loved reading one that was the story of an adult, and an adult describing her childhood. So basically, this is a memoir a la graphic novel. And one of the biggest things in any memoir for me is the power of selection. What do you put in and what do you leave out? And Alison Bechdel absolutely killed it at that. This is really at its core a story about her and her father. She also just looks at him with sort of this dry observational eye. So he really loves like restoring their home. They live in this, like, I'm going to say it wrong, but like a Victorian giant mansion-y thing in like a small New York town. And so he spends a lot of time and makes his kids really help him a lot with restoring like the wood banisters and stuff. There's a lot of great books in here. So the things that Alison Bechdel was reading in college, and her father was a professor, I think. And those are integrated into the story in a way that's so smart and I feel like so hard to do. And there's references that totally went over my head, but not in a way that was obnoxious, like in a way that I haven't read the book, so I can't say how it went through this book and tell it to you. When I was reading the book, it was apparent to me what I was supposed to be understanding, which is the dream, when you're reading. So props to Bechdel for that. I really liked the illustrations. I thought the graphic novel setup was a great way to go for this. Interestingly, this is a fun fact. It's called Fun Home because her father was the embalmer at the local funeral home. They owned the funeral home. So when they would go to work, they would abbreviate it and they call it the Fun Home. And she grew up like dusting the flowers and vacuuming and stuff with her siblings. So yeah, I love a story. I love a new medium, or I don't really know, genre. I would say there's heavy stuff in here done really well. Okay. Two more. I don't know what order these are in at all. Oh, I do. I put them in the order of the best ones that I read. I was like, these aren't by date. So we're in the top four. Okay. This one was a really great book. It is actually not like transcendent, best ever August was a weird month. That's a lot of books that I like didn't even finish. So that's why Run for the Hills is in my top section. Also, because the main character's name is Maddie, she goes by Mad. I knew it was a road trip book, and it was partially there was a stop off at the University of Oklahoma, which is my college of my heart, not the college I attended, which I also adore, but just like the school that I cheer for and everything. So this is a book you can absolutely go into knowing nothing about it. And if you want to do that, just skip until you see me holding up this book in the little thumbnail. If you want a little more, Mad is a farmer in Tennessee. She's working the peaches stand or whatever. And she and her mom were left by her father when she was about 8 years old. And that was 20 or 30 years ago at this point, probably 20 years ago. And she's working the farm stand, and this man walks up and he's like, "Whoa, I'm your brother." She's like, "Don't have one of those." And he is from Boston. And for the 10 years before Mad's dad lived with her and her mom, the father had lived in Boston with this guy and his mom and lived a complete life and then left after 10 years. And he's like, "I started looking into it and I found you." And she's like, "What?" And he's like, "And there's more." She's like, "What?" And there are. And so they go on a road trip to meet the other children of the father. And it's, I don't want to say it's as weird as it sounds. I would say it lives up to what it sets you up for. So it's not shallow, it's not particularly deep. It's not super twisty and unbelievable, but it is a little bit windy and a little bit unbelievable. So I totally enjoyed it. It did not take me long to read. Kevin Wilson's a really strong writer. I say that like I know this is the only book of his I've read, but people love Nothing to See Here by him, which I would absolutely read after this one. And I was always happy to be reading it. And it did what it was trying to do. And unlike some of the other books we've talked about, it was not too obvious about it. And that will be my transition to A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, because this, which now it's been a while since I finished it, has become one of the archetypal books in my head for discussing, using your book to explore existential questions, but not in a way that feels like the author is trying to do anything. You aren't thinking about the author. It is so baked into the book and the characters and their actual dilemmas and what they're actually trying to figure out and what is coming up in their worlds that it just belongs, and that you're so willing as the reader to go along with those conversations because it makes sense that they're happening in the moment that they're happening in, that the characters who are talking about them are actually thinking about those things. And if you can do that, which is really hard to do, and you can do it really well throughout a book, by the end there's something so gorgeous that you've made. And that's what A Tree Grows in Brooklyn was by Betty Smith. So I think it's sort of a subset of the problem that I talk about with the obvious theme handling, but it's even more zoomed into whenever there's something that you really have to think about, where you're like pushed to the edge of your ability to understand the world or to handle things. And when you're, as a character, I mean, having to bounce these ideas off people around you or hide things from people around you, what do you do? What conversations do you have in those moments? And anyway, okay, so I finally read A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. And this one I had bought a while ago. And usually once I buy a book, I read it within a couple of months. It speeds it up my TBR, especially for fiction, way faster. I had this one for longer than a couple of months and finally just decided to read it, and it's so good. and it follows Francine from when she's Francie Nolan is the main character's name, from when she's 11 to, I'm going to say, like 19. And it's so good. It is set in Williamsburg, and it is set in a very different Williamsburg than the Williamsburg that exists today, which is like an Epcot of millennial aesthetic. It is the weirdest neighborhood in America, and I do not like it at all. As far as just like everything is so over designed, over graphic designed, and way fancier than it needs to be. And it's a weird place, Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Anyway, it used to be different. This book is set about almost 100 years ago exactly, a little bit less than. And Williamsburg then was really pretty insular. You could get out if you had a job in Manhattan, which is why her brother sometimes gets to leave. Her father, I think, goes to work in Manhattan, but she largely does not leave Williamsburg, regardless of the fact that the Williamsburg Bridge is, or the Brooklyn Bridge, I don't remember, is right there. And anyway, she is a daughter in a family of 4. She has a brother and then her parents, and her and her mom's relationship is done really well, and it's not very, they don't have a very strong or close or easily understanding relationship with each other. And that is real for some kids, especially through like being 12, 13, 14. And I thought that was so well done. She also is pretty close with her dad, and he is an alcoholic. And so the problems that he brings in are brought through, and the themes are brought through really well. And they're living, I don't know if I said this, I guess I was getting to it with the not leaving Williamsburg, but Williamsburg is like tenement district, really, really poor neighborhood to live in at the time. So throughout the book, they have to move a couple of times, and it's always trying to find a place to go, trying to find a place where you can make rent. And then the way that they like hoard, or that's not the word, but the way they have to plan around pennies and nickels in this book to meet the needs of what they have to pay for groceries, or the life insurance guy, or different things they're saving up for, is incredible. I mean, I know that like a nickel used to have value theoretically, but to read about it so literally in this book, and then also to read not just about like, oh, the dollar used to be worth more, but also to read about poverty in the city in a time where it was going through some transformations, but not ones that had really reached Williamsburg yet. I'm trying to decide if there's anything else I need to say about this. It was so precious. It's one of the only books on Goodreads that 5 of my 12 Goodreads friends have read. And also, every one of those people gave it 5 stars, which is incredible. Let me see. Guys, look how long this is. That is either a really bad sign or a good sign. And in this one, it's a good one. Let's start with, oh no, it's a little earlier than I thought it was, time period wise. It's early 20th century. Oh, okay, wait. This is a quote from a scene where Francie and her brother go to get their vaccinations, which those are new at history at this point in time, so that they can go to school. And they were so nervous about getting shots that they distracted themselves by playing mud pies because their mom couldn't take off work to go take them to the doctor. So they're completely on their own. And the doctor is shaming Francie for being dirty and talking about her in front of her with the nurse. And she bites her tongue. She gets the shot, and then she looks at them. Guys, we're doing more of this than you needed, but also not, because it's such a good book. Francie spoke up. My brother is next. His arm is just as dirty as mine, so don't be surprised. And you don't have to tell him. You told me. They stared at this bit of humanity who had become so strangely articulate. Francie's voice went ragged with a sob. You don't have to tell him. Besides, it won't do no good. He's a boy and he don't care if he is dirty. I had no idea she understood what I was saying. She heard the doctor say it as she went out. So I pulled that quote and I said, that's the author describing Francie. It's also the author describing the reader's position throughout the book. You're staring at this little bit of humanity who'd become so strangely articulate. The plot really is just growing up things: holidays, school, making ends meet, outings, work, and conflict with family. But just growing up is, I guess, an oxymoron. In Smith's hands, growing up in tenements in Brooklyn becomes a vehicle for existential questions explored so deftly you don't even see the author's shadow. There's sexual violence against women and girls. There's the ravages of poverty. There's life and death, and through it all, family. This book is great. It's really, really great. And it was one of the first YA books, although Maud did beat her by like a year, publishing Heaven to Betsy, which we have to give credit to that. Interestingly, they both published these books in the 40s about little girls growing up in approximately the same time in history. So I enjoyed this as a counterpart to Betsy Tacy, which is set in mid-rural, small town Minnesota. There is enough money in the Betsy Tacy books. The parents work, but the kids kind of have everything they need. This is set in the same time period, but very different place in the world and really different financial situation for the family. So I loved that. Okay, those are the books from August. It was a weird reading month because it's kind of a big pile, and also none of these would I go to bat for with my full chest. So actually, that's a lie. This one I would. I am so behind this one. And the top 4 were really fantastic. So anyway, good night. For me, it's late.